There's this old term Facebook they used to use. It's called like, make stuff thumb stopping. Which is like so corny, but it's actually really true, right? You're like, I'm doom scrolling on my phone, and if I immediately identify it's an ad in like 2 seconds and it's boring, I'm just gonna skip past it. I think the thing that's hard sometimes to reconcile is, a lot of folks that are really in like performance marketing, they'll tell you like ugly ads work better. It breaks the paradigm. Like you stop, you look at it. And so like usually from a metrics driven thing, at least you'll get like, higher click-through rates and things like that with ugly ads. The challenge obviously with that, you're not measuring the people who like saw that and now are totally turned off by your brand. And so I think it's always a balance. You want to look at the metrics, you want to make things engaging, but you also need to be very mindful of like, what are you not measuring? Are you cheapening things? And I think it's more like you have to have this like sort of synthesis between being qualitative and like, if I looked at this, is this going to convince me to like buy this thing?
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Sam Ross, co-founder and CEO of Numeral.
And so what we're trying to do is make it so that anybody in the company can manage sales tax without much expertise.
Our conversation is a masterclass on all things growth at the 0 to 1 stage.
Growth doesn't matter at all if you don't have good retention. You have these tactics that'll work for a fixed period of time, and like while they work and while that arbitrage still exists, like you really have to go all out exploiting it.
We talk early growth lessons from Airbnb.
I figured out how to drive an incremental $1 billion of GMV.
Stories from being one of the largest, earliest Facebook advertisers.
Sam Altman came to our office, like, this is going to be a $10 billion company, no question.
How to work backwards from strong demand to find business ideas.
The match made in heaven is you pair these like growth tactics that get you out of the atmosphere with an actual business that you're able to drive and capture value over a long period.
How to establish early social proof around your product.
If someone you trust is using that product, that's a quick kind of like meta rationality to go and delegate your searching.
Why you shouldn't hire a growth person as your first growth hire.
And everyone that was good that I wanted to hire, they were actually just entrepreneurs.
We also get into what makes sales tax so complicated.
It's a decentralized system in the sense that this is not governed by the IRS or some centralized authority. You're actually dealing with each individual state.
And how he raised a Series A in 4 days.
I got a real lesson in terms of selling from him. He's like, open your calendar. Let's get dinner tomorrow night. And then like block off this time on Friday. And also, what's your phone number? I'm going to send you like 6 reference checks on me like right away.
A quick thank you to Susan and Tripp at Uncork, Chetan at Benchmark, Lenny Rachitsky, and Nate Matherson for helping brainstorm topics for Sam. A reminder, I publish 2 episodes of The Peel every week. Subscribe to follow along and check out the back catalog of almost 100 episodes exploring the world's greatest startup stories, just like this one. Let's talk to Sam.
Well, Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this will be exciting. Can you, for somebody who's not familiar with Numeral, actually listeners of the show are actually probably familiar with Numeral, but can you just real quick for somebody who's not a regular listener, just explain real quick what it is?
Yeah, so Numeral helps businesses, in particular SaaS and e-commerce businesses, with their sales tax compliance. So, if you're a business, as you get to scale, you end up having to go and collect sales tax on your orders in different states in the US. So if you sell software into Texas, you need to make sure you're collecting tax on those software orders and putting that in your invoices, and then actually going to each individual state and remitting that money. And so we try to make that process as simple as possible and just kind of obfuscate away all of that complexity.
Complexity, like, is it pretty complex? Like, it sounds like it's one of those things that could be super straightforward, but also sounds like one of those things that could be extremely time consuming and easy to mess up.
What makes it hard is a couple of things. One is that it's like no one wants to think about it or deal with it, right? This is just like compliance. It's not strategically important. So every like minute you spend on it as a founder or even CFO, it just feels like a waste of time. And so I think that always makes it even more painful to deal with. But it is complex because it's a decentralized system in the sense that this is not governed by the IRS or some centralized authority. You're actually dealing with each individual state has their own set of laws, right? And within that, individual districts can have their own laws, right? So for example, software is not taxable in the state of Illinois, but in Chicago, it actually is. So you have to like go and figure out, at an individual district level, what's going on. There's 13,000 different tax jurisdictions. So,
Whoa, this is US or global?
This is just US alone. So yeah, global is its own set of complexities I'm happy to get into, and we do help folks with.
Let's talk about
global.
that later. That sounds too complicated for right now.
Before I make it like too insane, and there's like a street in Colorado. It's always like an example where like, I think like the west side of the street has one tax rate and the east side of the street has a different tax rate because they're in different school districts. And so we actually, like, one thing we'll end up having to do is, when we get an address, we don't just look at the city. We actually like put it into like a GIS map and figure out what's that exact rate for that GIS coordinate.
So like if it's an odd number or even number, it's on a different side of the streets, you have to know and like really map out exactly what jurisdiction.
Yeah, exactly. We actually have like a map of every, special district in the US.
Oh, wow.
And those actual tax rates. And then on top of that, different products are taxed differently, right? So,
yep.
Here in California, if your water's sparkling, it's taxable, but if the bubbles are not there, it's tax exempt.
What?
Or like
that was a thing.
Or if you're selling like something like an Olipop, it's a soda in some states, but other states, because it has 3% juice, it's taxable as juice, and
oh, wow.
the carbonation can come into play. So there's all this crazy complexity, and most businesses, you don't have a sales tax expert in house.
Yeah.
And also, frankly, you don't want to have to hire that. That's like a waste of energy on your side, and that's not something that's strategically important. So like really, the idea of starting Numeral has been to just always like, how do we make it so that anyone in your company with like zero expertise here can just like delegate away all the sales tax knowledge, and we can we're able to like obfuscate that complexity for you.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's basically just all rules based, right? So it's like if you build the software that just like encodes everything, it's just like, here's the thing, feed it in, and it probably just tells you. Maybe I'm simplifying.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's pretty deterministic in the sense that there's not a lot of judgment calls in. So there's some examples we like to use where there is a little judgment. I think we were talking about like edible underwear, where is that taxable as candy, or is that taxable as lingerie?
Yeah.
And so there's cases where things are tough. We have a lawyer on staff, our like head of tax research, and he'll read case laws and things like that to figure out some of these nuanced cases. But most of the time, this thing, it's not like when you have, say, your income taxes, there's a little bit more judgment going in there, and maybe more discretion involved. Whereas with sales tax, it's more black or white. It's very complex, but most of the time, there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things.
And I know you've kind of gotten into this because you've started and scaled like a bunch of different companies and brands over the years. And I think one of the big things I want to hit on in this conversation is some of those things that you like, some of the different products that you've built over time. But a big component of it has been growth and growing them. And I know we're kind of this episode, I actually haven't thought of the exact title yet. So we'll see how this plays out in like post-production, but some sort of like 0 to 1 growth playbook is I think kind of going to be a good chunk of what we're going to talk about. So I think just generally speaking, when I talk to people, when I was like, hey, I'm having Sam on the podcast, what should we talk about? Like, what is he good at? Basically, everyone was like, oh, he's really good at growth. You should have him talk about growth. How did you kind of first get into just thinking about growth? Was there like a certain moment where you're like, oh, this is pretty interesting?
Yeah, so I think it started, my first tech job was this company, Teespring. It was this very hyped company with, Sam Altman and Keith Raboy on the board. I think at one point we were like the #1 Stripe customer in terms of like payment volume going through the system. This is very early on. Like,
this is like 2013.
Yeah, something like that. Like spoken in the same sentence as Stripe. Like, Sam Altman came to our office, like, this is going to be a $10 billion company, no question. Yeah. And so all I have to say is there's a lot of, intensity. And while I was there, actually Facebook ads came out, newsfeed ads. And this is a time where people probably don't remember, Facebook stock was not doing so well when it went public. There's articles, Procter & Gamble is cutting all their Facebook spend. They say it doesn't work. But actually, they were releasing all these like intense things you could do on the targeting side.
Yep.
And so that's what our sellers in the Teespring platform were doing. And so we actually, one of the first things I did is I actually went and started running Facebook ads to sell t-shirts, kind of just as experiments to learn. And that really kicked off, like, I would say, a lot of my background in thinking about growth.
And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about some of those things that you did. Like, what are some of the examples of ways that you would do Teespring ads?
Yeah, so I think back then it was a little bit more Wild West in terms of Facebook sharing their data, right? This is well before the
clampdown,
the Trump winning the election, and then media backlash and the clampdown coming from all that.
Yep.
So yeah, you could do a lot more things in terms of targeting. So one thing, for example, we would do is you could actually, make searches on Facebook and scrape. So we'd make a t-shirt, hey, keep calm and drink like a Novak, and like make a shirt targeted towards your name. And then, so I would, scrape Facebook for everyone named Novak, get a list of all the Facebook user IDs, upload that as an ad. And then, you'd be targeted with the t-shirt with your name, and it'd be, you'd get these like metrics that were like off the charts, 30% engagement rates, like dollar cost per conversion, things like that. And so we were able to do very like clever and hyper targeted ads. Eventually what happened was, there was a College Humor article that came out one day. It was like top 10 creepy. This is College Humor 10 years ago, right?
Yeah. I think I remember like some of these, like the backlash about the crazy targeted products.
Exactly. So it was like top 10 creepiest Facebook ads. And number one was t-shirts with your name on it. And like literally like that article came out that morning. By that afternoon, like all the ads of all of our sellers, because it was sellers. It wasn't like Teespring running the ads mostly. All the ads had been basically banned, and we found out years later. So it went all the way up to Zuckerberg. He was really mad, and they actually hard-coded all sorts of things in the algorithm to limit the reach of t-shirt ads in the Facebook platform. Because I think at that point, something like over 5% of Facebook ad spend was people selling t-shirts on Facebook.
Wow.
Because, nobody knew how to, there was targeting in the algorithm, right? Like you could target people that like chihuahuas or nurses, and nobody else was targeting chihuahua lovers on Facebook. Like dog grooming companies hadn't figured out Facebook ads yet, but we could figure it out. Oh, cool. I'll put a chihuahua in a t-shirt, like set up an ad and, design a shirt, set up an ad in like 5 minutes, and I'd make a few $1,000 from that. And so it was kind of like the first way to like really, you take that interest graph on Facebook.
Yep.
And I think we learned there's just a lot of tactics you figured out. I think that was a lot of our learning on growth is, you have these tactics that'll work for a fixed period of time. And like, while they work and while that arbitrage still exists, like you really have to go all out exploiting it, because probably 6 months from now, it's a market and the arbitrage will be gone.
So you just think about like if you're really thinking with like a hyper growth mindset, you have to like find these pockets of like undervalued channels and just blow them up to the extent of like you just have to capitalize on it while it's there, and it's going to be gone soon because other people will probably see it and move in.
Yeah, so I think exactly. So I think the thing that's like tough with growth, or honestly it's just marketing, is that the things that are obvious to do, run a Super Bowl ad or like whatever, like those are probably priced pretty fairly, and you're not, and if your business is really good, maybe it works for you, but it's not going to be like exploitable. But you have these periods where Facebook ads are really underpriced, or when TikTok came out a while ago, you could get tons of organic reach, and most people in growth know, okay, this is only going to last for so long. I'm not going to build a durable business, promoting my brand on TikTok, but like for these few months while I can actually get distribution, like you should just go aggressively, juice the channel or whatever you want to call it, like for as much as possible, because these opportunities are usually short lasting.
So the opportunity with Facebook ads was people basically thought they didn't work. So there was just no competition, but they were actually very effective.
I think people didn't think they worked. They were very effective. And I think it was that you could also do this like super hyper targeted, right? You could upload a list of one person and target them. So we would always play pranks on each other at the office where, it'd be like someone's birthday, we make some crazy ad with their face on it. And then then we'd run it like with the big budgets. Every time they logged into Facebook.
Yep.
This is like even before mobiles. They'd log into Facebook on their computer and they just see ads of their face on it for like weeks, and it like drive them nuts. So amazing. We would do all sorts of crazy stuff that was just super targeted.
And you would pay like $1 for that, right, or something, like because you're only paying for the impressions that shows up on that person.
Yeah, I mean that would be pennies, right? And there was a game of cat and mouse. So quickly Facebook saw that. Okay, now you have a limit. You have to target at least, I don't know, like 100 people for the ad. So that was fine. We just target 100 people, and then we'd create an exclusion list of 99 people. And so you still figure out there was just kind of this cat and mouse game where they were constantly updating their terms of service to like, and then we would just kind of find different loopholes to continue to target. And so Yeah, I mean, with the shirts of people's names on it, I remember I could only do it so much. I had a full-time job. I had some friends who were like, unemployed or half employed, and I taught them how to like target people by name. So I remember they had a weekend where they rented an Airbnb. They just bought a bunch of stuff to party. They stayed up like, all weekend, like, and just launching these Irish shirts with different Irish names on it. Keep calm and drink like, O'Shanahan, whatever. And I think they made like 70 grand in a weekend, just like, because the opportunity was just so easy right then. We used to call it like free money. You just put the shirt up, like do the thing, you come back the next day and you've made a bunch of money. And so, these things in retrospect, right, when Facebook started cracking down and banning it, everyone's like, man, I should have, like, why did I sleep? Or why didn't I quit my job and just do this full time? I could have made millions of dollars. And so I think that's often what you learn is sometimes these opportunities, like, they're only going to last so long. And so, you can always do things the most efficient or careful way, but like if it's working, you just really got to go aggressive and double down, because that arbitrage will be gone soon, and you really want to capitalize on it.
Yeah, I had Austin Reef. He's the founder of Morning Brew. I know the newsletter. He was telling me he thinks that they were the first advertiser on Instagram stories. I don't know if anyone listening is able to fact check that, but I think we would both actually love to know if they were, because he's like convinced that they were. And when it first came out, he told me like they didn't sleep for 3 days. They just were constantly optimizing and running Instagram ads, and it was like a couple weeks where they were getting like 1 cent per converted subscriber. So they were just like, he said it was like in the history of Morning Brew, it was like the best 2-week, 3-week period, because they could just acquire someone who's worth like 10 or 20 bucks for a penny.
Yeah.
And so they were just like constantly all in on this thing, just trying to juice it and get as much as they could, because he knew that it probably wouldn't last forever.
Exactly. Yeah. In these newsletters too, right? Like even the value of a subscriber goes down over time, because everyone's subscribed to 100 newsletters. Yeah. And so it was maybe, maybe you'd value a subscriber at whatever, $5, like a couple years ago. Now it's valued at $1.50, whatever it is. And so, yeah, if you're first to market in some of these channels, it's valued a lot. I think what I've had to learn is, I was really good at these different growth hacks. And, the first real business I built as an entrepreneur was I was, selling these, like, we had cheap jewelry I'd buy in China for 50 cents for like $50. And, we sold $30 million of jewelry, made a ton of cash. But the problem is I was selling something with no retention. And so it wasn't a durable business. And, eventually I had to sell it for, pennies on the dollar. Whereas I think when you build something that's very durable, the match made in heaven is you pair these like growth tactics that get you, kind of get you out of the atmosphere, but you pair it with an actual business that's like, you're able to kind of drive and capture value over a long period and is durable. And that's how you actually build something that's sustaining versus, you can maybe get a bunch of growth in a short period and then it ends up not being, maybe you get a bunch of cash overnight, something like a gas app or something like that. But like, it's actually, you really want to have something compare. If you compare those two, that's how you build a really big business.
So it's probably then having just like the intellectual honesty of understanding like this is a temporary arb, and maybe I can make 100 grand or something, versus like, okay, I have a sustainable retentive product that is differentiated over time, and however we want to like dissect this competitive advantage and like the moat that they built or whatever, and just being like honest about like what the two different kind of lenses of it are, and just knowing which one you're doing.
I think that's right. I mean, again, no disrespect to doing like I've had all sorts of crazy hustles that like made a lot of cash in a short period. So I think it depends. Everyone has different goals, but I think in retrospect, right, you saw, if I had seen that like, Facebook ads are working well, like, okay, then I could go in, and we were doing different targeting based on the interest map there, meaning like, I could target nurses, like nurse shirts would sell so well.
Really?
Yeah, because I don't know, it's a huge demographic. They have disposable income is one of the biggest categories. So it's it's all these things about being pride. Like I save people's lives every day. These kind of corny things. You probably see less in San Francisco, more maybe in other parts of the country of these type of shirts. But in retrospect, what you shouldn't is like, wow, like nurses is this amazing market. What could I build there? And like I actually had a friend, he built a company. It was about staffing for nurses. And actually built like a durable VC-backed business for travel nurses staffing.
Which one is this?
Oh man, I'm forgetting the name right now.
There's one called Trusted Health, I think.
It's I'd worked with him before, and like he wasn't selling t-shirts. He was, oh man, I'm blanking on the name. think Hired or one of these other companies. But we knew that nurses, like he knew that he had a Facebook ad background. That's actually where he came from. And he knew that nurses like just were like a really active audience on Facebook you could target and sell them stuff. And so I think, again, it's like pairing that insight of not just on the product side, but like, is there like, is there like almost like, can I really capture that demand? And so sometimes you find like, wow, there's really this demand pool that I can, of this like market that I can really reach. And so you maybe want to backwards engineer like, okay, what are the types of services I can sell them? And what's the stuff that's going to be like the most, durable and value capturing business there?
Yeah, to the point of nurses, it's like they skew relatively higher income just on average. They're probably like maybe younger-ish, so they have like new disposable income versus like what they used to have. I don't know. It's an interesting category.
Like Figs is a great example of that, right?
Oh yeah.
So this is before Figs exist. Figs is like they sell luxury scrubs to nurses.
It's like insane business. It's like a public company now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a public company, and obviously I could have thought about that, right? I've sold tons of shirts to nurses. I could, why not, instead of selling cheap T-shirts that are printed on demand, like I should actually just go and get scrubs built. And
it's like their uniforms. Like they'll buy it to do their job. Like talk about retentive products.
Exactly. And so there's all these opportunities that like you probably, if you squinted hard enough, and weren't distracted by like the short-term cash of selling T-shirts, you probably could have found, again, these bigger business models that you could sell there.
Yeah.
There's other ones like truck drivers were like a huge demographic. I think, broadly, like these ad platforms tend to work well for, I think, it depends on which platform, but like it's like folks with like disposable income who are like maybe not like in their jobs have enough free time where they're just they're browsing on social media. Nurses are busy, but maybe they have like in between time, things like that.
Interesting. So one of the questions I want to ask you is like, what do most people get wrong when they just approach growth? We maybe hit on it a little bit. But anything else you'd want to add on that?
Good question. What do people get wrong? I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One thing I see, like my background's more on consumer growth, right? Having worked at Teespring, at Airbnb, and having done my own direct consumer businesses. So I'm still learning around B2B, but I just see so much like boring B2B stuff, right? Like I'll go on my LinkedIn feed and I see it's like, download our checklist of 7 KPIs. And like, is anyone actually like downloading a checklist of KPIs? That seems insane to me, And I think the approach we've taken is much more, again, stealing what I've learned on the consumer side is like, okay, actually what works well is, having some authority and getting, we get like influencers to go post about us or using content made by someone with some authority. Or having content that's just more engaging and interesting because, there's this old term Facebook they used to use. It's called like, makes stuff thumb stopping, which is like so corny, but it's actually really true, right? We're all doom, we're not all, a lot of us are like, I'm doom scrolling on my phone. And if it's something's like, if I immediately identify it's an ad in like 2 seconds and it's boring, I'm just going to skip past it. Yeah. But if something is like actually, is engaging and interesting, I think it works better, right? I think a lot of I think the thing that's hard sometimes to reconcile is, a lot of folks that are really in like performance marketing, they'll tell you like ugly ads work better. And like, because it's just like, it breaks the paradigm. Like you stop, you look at it. And so like usually from a metrics driven thing, at least you'll get like, higher click-through rates and things like that with ugly ads. The challenge obviously with that, I think the mistake you can make there is, you're only measuring the success metrics. You're not measuring the people who like saw that and now are totally turned off by your brand because like, oh, it's just some cheap, ugly thing. And so I think it's always a balance. You want to look at the metrics, you want to make things engaging, but you also need to be very mindful of like, what are you not measuring? And like, are you cheapening things like that? So I think that's another mistake you can make too far to the extreme where like performance marketers will just think that like brand people are total idiots and like you can't measure any, they're not measuring anything. And I think it's more like you have to have this like sort of synthesis between being qualitative and like, just like this, if I looked at this, is this going to convince me to like buy this thing, or is it going to convince me to like trust this thing? But at the same time too, like, okay, like take, a data informed approach and make sure what you're doing is like attention grabbing and things like that.
Yeah, because it's kind of like when you're performance marketing, it's also brand marketing. Like people are still seeing the product and seeing the brand. So
yeah,
it's hyper targeted,
yeah,
but they're still gonna have the memory of how it made them feel and how they think about it in the future.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I think like if someone that I think has always done fairly well at this is someone like a Hims, where they might have an ad that's just like be like a side by side, a bald, like a bald head and a hairy head, and it's like this like eye catching thing and like catches your attention. And it looks like maybe something like a drop ship or whatever would run, but then you like click through and like their website is like very intentionally designed before they even launched the company. I heard like they spent, I think like $300,000 on on photography and just
really,
they really want, I think again, their thing was like, how do we take this thing that's like shameful and like elevate it? And so I think again, the people who are best at marketing in like 2025 are really able to kind of, still have kind of marry like the best of like whatever, like brand marketing things that are hard to measure and really making things cool and desirable with also this sort of more data informed approach.
So one bigger question then, maybe like stepping back a little bit, if I'm starting a product or brand or company, whether it's like SaaS, consumer, just generally speaking, how should I think about maybe going from 0 to 1 on my brand, my marketing, my go-to-market? Like what kind of things would you, if you were like advising me, just tell me to think about and approach at a high level, and then maybe we can get a little more tactical?
Yeah, I think, obviously like the type of business matters. So, if you're a consumer, if you're, a consumer brand and, you think like, for example, like if you're a direct consumer goods brand, you're gonna need to like Facebook ads are gonna have to work for you, or else this business is never gonna work.
Really? Don't people say like don't rely on paid marketing? Like that's another.
Yeah, they say that, but I think pretty much every single scaled up like brand that's selling on Shopify, like direct consumer, that I've seen is spending. Typically their number one channel is Facebook ads or something similar. And so like one thing I've done in the past is I would actually create it. So you want to actually figure out like what are my economics here? Are they going to pencil out? Because if the economics don't pencil out, it's never going to work. And so in those cases, one thing I would do, I've done before, is I would actually go and create a fake Shopify store with like renderings of what the thing I want to sell. I run ads to it. I collect the credit card payment. I don't, I put a temporary hold. I don't actually ever charge the people, but you want to see like, are people going to put money down?
Yep.
And it's not that you need to get the economics down to an exact degree, but you can get a sense like, are people willing to actually put money down? Because if you just go survey friends, like, hey, would you buy this? Like, yeah, sure, yeah. Like they want to be nice to you. They're not going to like be real with you. Like people are just too agreeable. And so I think if it's something that's like consumer, you can actually go and do this testing, spend a couple $1,000. And again, I think people will get confused when they do this and they'll go like, oh, I had this good click-through rate or something. Like, no, like if people actually put their credit card down, like that's what we'll tell you. And it's hard to always, these things don't work for every type of, in every case, but I think for like, less expensive goods, something like that can work. So, trying to get a sense of the demand ahead of time. Similarly, if your thing is on an analogy there, maybe on the kind of B2B side, is do the same thing maybe with like cold outreach, right? And so go, like one thing we did really early on was, I first started with friends, but then after that quickly, I was just like cold emailing Shopify brands like all over the place and was getting like a shockingly high hit rate of folks who were like, yes, like I hate the solution I have, or like I don't even have a solution yet, but I know I've been needing to do this. And like immediately like, wow, like if I've only emailed, 500 people and I'm getting this many response rate, you can kind of pencil out like actually even just doing cold email alone is going to get me like pretty far. And like our first, I think like $1.5 million or so of ARR was just purely on cold email. We didn't have any ads or anything like that. And so I think just going and try to get people who are not your friends to tell you that they would actually go and buy and get a sense of the demand there, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think Ramp famously, I hope this is public. Maybe I'm disclosing something, but like, and in the early days, and I think still like 90% of their revenue or 80%, or I'm probably not the exact number, but it's like a much bigger number than you would think, of their revenue comes from literally just cold outbound, just like getting in front of people, saying like, hey, here's Ramp, here's the product, do you want to use it, blah, blah, blah. Which is kind of crazy that it's that high.
Yeah, they're like the pinnacle example for like doing, I think, a company that's super focused, like just amazing execution at B2B growth, right? Like, yes, they like have all these ads, we're gonna like, you know, save you money, or we have bill pay, but like honestly, like my sense is like the real reason, you know, you had Brex already established in a good company and good at marketing and all this, but like the reason Ramp's been able to get such intense growth is I think they really valued building like a really high quality growth team there. Like there's really some amazing talent they've had, and a number of them have started like successful startups even. And I think, you know, by making it like growth, like a first class citizen, and there's a lot of investment in terms of the infrastructure they built, they were able just to like out execute, because at the end of the day, you're selling a credit card, which is like really a commodity product. Yeah. And yeah, like surprisingly cold outbound just like worked really well for them. And I think they were doing it, and they had a lot of tactics there with under the hood that made their stuff work better than everyone else.
Yeah, because I think it's one of those things. It's like if you have this really big top of funnel brand, and then you're just like always aware of it, and then someone's like, hey, convert right now, and they're like, or like, hey, here's our product again, like I'm asking you to make a commitment to it or whatever, like the specific targeted, you know, sniper shot cold outreach, it's actually more effective than just going in without them even being aware of your product.
Yeah, totally. I think the cold outbound, you see it works so much better once folks have like been primed already, you know, like with other touch points. And these things are always really hard to measure. I did some insane work on like multi-touch attribution at Airbnb, and like pulled my hair out and was like, okay.
Oh yeah, really? So what did you learn there? Or what was the study that you did?
Oh man, I mean, we had crazy stuff where like Facebook was sending me like this is again before Facebook clamped down on stuff, but they had this program called Atlas where they'd bought like what's called like a DSP, and basically Facebook had like tracking data. You know, Facebook puts their pixel on every company's website. And so they had this, they could track you around the internet on every website you're visiting, and they were able to map that cross device. They had this in crazy level data. They were like giving us, you know, in like a data room, there was some security here, but like log level like data, people's traffic on, and and they had a team of, I think, like 8 data scientists, and we had a data scientist on my side. And these are like folks with like PhDs from Harvard and econ, studying under Larry Summers, like just like genius level people. And we take all this, we tried to build these like multi-attribution models, and like you just end up, it's, you know, you maybe build something that like looks good on the historicals, and then you start as soon as you start optimizing towards those metrics, I can't remember the name of that principle, right? But when you pick a metric and you optimize towards it, it makes the model not work anymore, right? So they would say like, oh, you're super undervaluing retargeting. I'm making this up. So let's put a bunch of budget into retargeting now. And as soon as I do that, like you think it looks really well, it looks really good, and then you run some study again, and no, it's like that's not the right way to think of it, because you're optimizing on like some correlation, not something that's causal. But in short, basically what I'm saying is I think a lot of these things are pretty intractable, and it's really hard to know. Someone has so many touch points, and half of them are just going to be like conversations with their friends, and it can be as subtle as, you know, some people think like, okay, I'm just going to only target, you know, I'm only going to target the buyer of my product, right? So in my case, like, hey, let's only target, say, the CFO of a startup. And it's like, actually, you really want like also everyone surrounding that person to know about Numeral, so that when they go and buy Numeral, it's not like them going on a whim to make that decision. Everyone else is, oh yeah, I've heard of that before. Oh yeah, like I think that's probably pretty good. And it just makes the buying decision so easy, right? So like if no one's getting fired for adding Ramp to their startup because everybody has heard of Ramp and there's some trust there. Versus like if that buyer had only gotten hyper targeted from some other credit card startup, but they don't have that authority.
And some money too. It's like, are you trusting your money with this random startup that no one's heard of versus, oh, they run Super Bowl ads. Like
yeah, exactly.
They work with Saquon Barkley, right? Like, how would you not trust them?
Yeah. So I think this is what makes like this measurement part of like marketing is super hard. People have tried all this stuff, and I think there's ways like you can do some stuff. You know, you want to like, it's not that you want to ignore the data. Like you kind of look at stuff bottoms up, and you kind of make a best guess. But a lot of it for me at least, it's just trying to like, run just a lot of back of the envelope math, trying to be, have a good intuition around it. I think I'm fortunate that I have a lot of like tacit knowledge from being in different places, right? So, like Airbnb, for example, there's this thing on like Google where like Google like they're very exploitative in that like you have to pay to be on your own keyword, right?
Oh yeah.
So at Airbnb, we were spending, oh man, I don't, the budget of 1 year I think on Google Ads is like $1 billion. So maybe we're spending like
what?
You're spending like 50. I think it's maybe cut down now. We're spending like something like $50 million a year just to like bid on the keyword Airbnb. So Booking.com didn't show up above it. So we ran like all these like crazy experiments, like difference studies where we had, like these data scientists trying to run stuff at geolocation and like, to figure out like how incremental is bidding on our own keyword. And like, you get into, hey, I get a sense, I can't remember the exact number, something like maybe like 15% of it's incremental, but you see enough of these studies over time and you get a sense, okay, I should probably like, if I'm bidding on my own keyword, I should probably only trust that something like, 15% of those conversions are incremental and the rest of them are just kind of
would have converted anyways.
Right?
Because they would have searched Airbnb and be like, Booking.com, that's not what I need. I'll keep scrolling. Oh, Airbnb, there it is.
Exactly.
I'll click the second or third.
Exactly. Yeah. But maybe 15% of those people, like, they would have just clicked the Booking.com thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of this stuff is like, I'm not gonna like run I can't run that experiment that Airbnb did. I just don't have, I could never power that study. And it's also just a pain in the butt to run that analysis. And so a lot of the time it's like, you get an intuition around like how effective something is, and you can kind of discount it or give it extra credit based on intuition.
It seems like to your point, intuition, it seems like a social proof and like that kind of stuff is a pretty good strategy for generally like building trust around this stuff. Like how would you recommend doing that? Like if I'm a non-social proofed product, like if I'm like, man, I need to build some social proof, like how'd you recommend approaching it?
So I mean, what we've done at least what's worked for us at Numeral is like we started off in the e-commerce space. And so I think like one thing early on is we knew this is a strategy we wanted to take. And so we put a lot of effort into like trying to figure out like good angel investors that, we knew would like, would talk about us in the future. So for example, there's this guy, founder Moise Ali. He started like native deodorant. I think he like owned the thing like pretty much outright, sold to 100 million to see Procter & Gamble. But like we knew we wanted to get him, not just because he was a good name, but he's someone who I think is highly trusted, right? A lot of folks in at least the e-commerce space, they'll shill anything and like, and they're named, their advocacy doesn't mean much, but he's someone that's like very disagreeable, will be quick to call out like people he thinks are scams, things like that. And so we knew if we had Moise eventually tweet about us at some point, and similarly we had another influencer, Sean Purry, My First Million podcast, we knew like if we had them on our side, that would mean a lot. And like Sean, he has his own brand on the e-commerce side that we service, and so it makes again the authenticity is there because he could talk about
like I actually use this.
Actually use this.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, it's not always easy to do this, but if you can get angels who ideally actually use your product, and again, it's not necessarily angels that have a lot of reach per se, but it's folks who are just people really trust their authority and actually don't talk about other products they use very much.
Yeah.
Then the value is really high there. And so we've been able to leverage that. I think that's just like quickly built us a lot of authority really quickly out of the game. People hadn't heard of us before, but a lot of time when you're busy, it's hard to evaluate different options in a space. And so often, if someone you trust is using that product, that's a quick kind of like meta rationality to go and delegate your searching, especially in a space like sales tax. Nobody wants to go check around 4, 5, 6 options. That's not a fun thing to take a demo on.
I'm taking a day to figure out what sales tax provider I'm going to use.
Yeah, especially when we talk to founders, like often they come on the call, they're like, look, I don't want to look around here. Like, just like solve this problem for me. I don't like make me think about it as little as possible. Yep. And so if they've already heard someone they trust is using it, that makes it makes the buying decision much quicker. Versus like maybe it's like a fun product to use and I want to really just demo it for fun. Like then you had you had to spend a lot more time just making like a magical experience of the product or something like that.
Yeah. How do you get the first person on board? Like, how did you get Moise? It sounds like that was like a strategic, like, we got to convince this guy. How do we get him?
So the first one was actually crazy. Was I tweeted before we even started the business, we were just thinking about it. Like, hey, I'm thinking about doing something around sales tax. Like, I had like 100 followers I had like 200 followers on Twitter. Like, would love to talk to some friends. And like Sean Purry somehow like saw that tweet and just DM me. He's like, yes, like this is an obvious idea. Like, and like he was like, I think our like first or second customer. So that I was just honestly, that's not good advice. I just got lucky there.
That Twitter algorithm, or maybe someone sent it to him.
No, I think he's just on Twitter all day. I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea because I had like 200 followers. Yeah, maybe someone sent it to him, but like he DM'd and like he was an alpha. It was like our first, second customer, and then before we did YC, like your terms changed, so we like made sure we got him like a good investment before we even did YC. So
cool.
So he'd be he'd feel good, like he had a big enough stake to care.
Yep.
And then someone like Moise, I just like went through, I knew someone I wanted to target. So kind of like trying to get an intro to any VC, you just go through your network, who's my mutuals.
Yep.
I found the right people. The other thing too is you have this like density of talent. So he was like, he personally knows Sean. And so I don't know if Sean I think someone else made the intro, like our friend Adam, founder of a Postscript, but he's like, I think again, he knew that Sean was a customer and an investor and fan of ours, and so that made it easier. So the other thing too with getting people to advocate is there's this weird phenomenon where like the first couple are harder, but then as you get more and more, everyone else, like the risk for someone to go and shill your product, or not shill, but like the risk to go, like talk about your product.
Yeah, you're like lending trust and lending credibility.
Exactly. And so I think, even like you saw like something like FTX, like they actually did a really good job at like going and getting people to promote them.
Yeah.
And maybe like Larry David wouldn't have gone and done it like out of the gate, but okay, already Tom Brady, Steph Curry, they're already doing it. And so every like incremental person is actually probably easier to get because there's less on the line for them, because if something goes wrong or like the startup ends up not succeeding or something, like, well, also like, no one's gonna like get, people were not that mad at Larry David. If Larry David had been the only person talking about FTX, maybe it would have been a bigger reputation hit, but because there was like 20 other big influencers talking about FTX, it kind of de-risked it for them. And also he didn't necessarily have to do his due diligence in the same way.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, and actually I think, like we mentioned, people who are familiar with Numeral, like you guys have sponsored the podcast in the past, and I just know Nate on your team, you had a growth pretty well, and that just helped me like get more comfortable with the product of knowing, like, I mean, Nate's a really sharp guy. It's like he's not going to join this company and grow it if he doesn't understand it. And then also I know a bunch of the people that are customers and use the product and like it. So it's like, okay, makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think there's this thing in startups where I'd heard it, but I didn't really understand it till I started, of like momentum, like really mattering. And so you have this thing where it's like, we were doing pretty well, and Nate was actually an angel investor of ours. And he knew we were doing well, so when he was shutting down his company or selling off his company and looking for something new to do, like he was excited. He was excited to join because we were doing well. So again, the momentum of doing well gets better talent, and then by getting better talent, Nate's been like a force multiplier on our team on real just like incredible at growth. And so so then he grows our business more. Our business grows faster. You get additional talent or additional investment or better logo investors, and these things all kind of compound onto each other. And so, the cold start's always really hard, but I think as you get into the atmosphere, this is something that like I'd seen a little bit before, places like Airbnb, but I really like I can really like feel it in my bones now.
So I know you have this hot take on not hiring growth, like career growth people to do growth. Yeah. We just talked about Nate, who's like the head of growth at Numeral. So why shouldn't you hire? Like, it sounds like hire a growth person, hire somebody who knows growth. Like, why not?
Yeah. Good question. So, I have a lot of friends that are career growth people, so no disrespect.
Yeah, no offense.
There are a lot of talented folks out there. I think what I've found is, with broad, whatever you want to call growth, or honestly, growth is really mostly just marketing, but like, it's trying to make it higher status so engineers like actually respect you, right? Because marketers think, that engineers think that marketers are just some like lowbrow, shillers or whatever. what I've seen is like the bet when I went to go hire a head of growth, and I started looking like who are the people I know that are best, and everyone that was good that I wanted to hire, they were actually just entrepreneurs. Because if you're good enough and confident that you can actually go and like drive demand for something really well, you end up, like, why are you going to get paid some like fixed salary? And growth people don't get paid like salespeople on a commission. They get paid some fixed salary. So when I was at Airbnb, I figured out how to drive an incremental $1 billion of GMV. I was like really proud. We like figured some stuff, we did a bunch of stuff, built a bunch of stuff on the Facebook API, and we're like, holy crap, this is like we just crushed it. And then they're like, cool, you can get like a 3% raise at the end of this. And I was like, this is insane. Like, like I should be getting like, this should be paying me like $10 million or something or more. Yeah. And so that was kind of my impetus. One of my impetuses for leaving is I was like, okay, I'm confident in my abilities. Like I'm just going to make way more on my own. And that's all everyone else I know is good at growth has ended up going in doing that. And I think, when you go from playing with house money to playing with your own money, you just learn a lot more because every decision really matters. Yeah. And any piece of pain from mistakes, you really feel it, right? And so when I went to go search, I talked to a lot of folks, and I realized after a certain months, like, okay, I actually have to just find another like founder who's like is looking for something new. And I got lucky where Nate, again, was one of our angels. He happened to just message me, and I remember I responded to his email within like 4 minutes, and we gave him a job offer within 2 days.
That's amazing.
Sometimes you have to go really fast there, but yeah, I think anyone that's at least like if they're either founder or just like they've done some type of growth stuff with like their own money and on their own without like a system where they just kind of come in, plug and play, you just learn a lot more. Now there's obviously exceptions to the rule, or people I have friends who are incredibly talented, but I think a lot of, and I think broadly too, like growth and marketing is not always attracting like the highest level of talent, right? In the sense that, all the super ambitious, like Stanford, kids, they want to go out and be product managers or VCs or something like this. It's maybe a little higher status or pays better. And I think people a lot of the time, they end up accidentally in growth. And so maybe like on average, there's just like, you're not the average like career growth person is just not that same level of like, elite talent.
I think it's interesting with Nate because he's been in sort of growth and marketing, like his startups that he's built have been around like SEO and like helping you grow your company. Like that was the whole like his product for the past couple of years. So interesting hire.
Yeah, I think it's non-traditional. Like, he'd done some SEO stuff. He hadn't done other, I knew that he had a big following on like LinkedIn and big following on, some following on Twitter. And he was just like within the YC, the YC community, there's like this internal social network called Bookface, and he's like an iconic poster there. Like people know him.
Okay.
Yeah, he's like,
I'm not on it, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah. He's a legend. Like he posts all the time, and he's invested in like over 150 YC companies from his own personal fund. And so just I think I knew he was super networked, and most even just showing that, hey, you can like build like a personal brand and personal followers, like that's just marketing growth in and of itself. And so it's not like, I think sometimes, an engineer, you can run them through like a code test. With someone on the growth and marketing side, you can ask them pointed questions around different things, but like actually seeing that what you've actually accomplished. And he's also built businesses himself as well. And he's gotten big logos and stuff. And so I think largely, and again, the skill set you're really looking for in a growth person is just like super high agency, creative thinker, and like, Nate's always got some creative idea. Like he sent one in his own company, he'd sent me like hot sauces he designed with his brand on it. And
nice.
And if a good growth person, always you ask them like, hey, I need to solve this problem, and it's like they can quickly unblock themselves. Nate's always like, I got a guy for that. I got a girl for that. Like we came in, within like a month, he's like, I have 14 different content writers for like our SEO. I got like 2 editors. I got my designer doing this. He just had like, he already had like a whole kind of roster of folks that he could like pull from. And I think that's what I've seen from anyone that's been doing this type of stuff for a long time is over time you kind of accrue this network of like vendors typically on the growth side. So if someone doesn't have like like a network of vendors that they want to bring in on day one. Like, it's hard to learn that stuff from scratch because, you only know if a vendor is good if you've actually worked with them before.
Yeah, that's fair. And speaking about things you've done before, so when you talked a little bit about you were at Airbnb, added $1 billion in GMV, but while you were doing that, you also were launching your own brands and companies on the side. Can you just kind of talk about that, I don't know, like era of your life and some of the things that you did?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was at Teespring, as I mentioned, on the nights and weekends, I was like a prolific seller, sold like a few $1 million of t-shirts, whether it's someone's name on it or all sorts of funny content on there. And then when I went to Airbnb, I kind of put that on pause for a while and was actually focused on my job. And I think at a certain point when I was, I don't know, when I was told I was going to get a 3% raise, I was like, all right, this is probably not. And the company, I think, was just becoming a little bit more. We went from this kind of early startup, like high energy place, to what Chesky will go on about in terms of being more corporate in the culture. I think, hopefully it's changed, gone back to being a little high energy before, but was slowing down. I realized like, okay, I need to I want to escape. And I started running some side hustles, and I had learned from Teespring a lot, again, how to do this targeted advertising. So I actually started selling cheap jewelry online. So we had this concept where we had like 1 or 2 pieces of jewelry, and then we'd print thousands of different backgrounds on it. So for example, we saw, we started with the demand side. So we see, okay, I wanted to build a business that worked well on different search channels. So we saw people search for gifts all the time, but they'll look for like gift for my piano teacher, gift for my mother-in-law, gift for, my cousin's bat mitzvah, whatever it is. And we're like, how do we create a product that's hyper targeted towards all of those? And so we have like one piece of jewelry, and then we just print thousands of different backgrounds to put on the back of the, like a paper background to like in the box to put on the jewelry. So you'd run an ad and be this big colorful thing. I love my bat mitzvah, and they search for bat mitzvah. And we could just run that on Google. We could put that on Amazon, Etsy, all these different platforms. And so
it's the same piece of jewelry.
Like we had ended up with like a couple, maybe 5 or 6, but it started just one piece of jewelry, and we just print on demand these little pieces of paper. So I started off, I was just in my house, like cutting paper at night after work and putting it in our mailbox. And eventually we had to get a whole kind of manufacturing situation, like a sort of a print on demand. But yes, that was my first foray. And we ended up selling like $30 million of jewelry over time. But I did the real impetus for me was, I grew up in the Bay Area, and then I was in after college, I came back for 7 years. I needed a break. And so I decided to live abroad for a couple of years, do like the whole digital nomad thing in 2017. And so this was like a way for me to kind of sustain my life and kind of have like something low commitment. There was bootstrap, no investors asking, telling me to come back to San Francisco. Like I can do it kind of on my own terms.
Yep. So we talked a little bit about like the fake ad testing earlier and like getting a consumer brand started, but maybe just like taking that like fully all the way. Like, how would you recommend if I'm sitting here and I'm somebody who's like, I want to start a brand or maybe start a product or a company, like how would you recommend approaching that? And how, maybe it sounds like maybe how did you do it with the jewelry?
Yeah, I mean, consumer's always harder, right? As you know, as a VC, I think like, I don't know, at least like in YC, it's like only like 10% of the companies are consumer these days.
I'm one of those VCs that does way more consumer than the average would tell you to do.
I shouldn't say this, but I think like doing a consumer business is way more fun, at least from like at least someone with like a marketing kind of background, like consumer marketing. It just, you can be a little more creative and you get a lot more data to work with. And so I think it can be fun. It's just obviously like the challenge is like the durability. Right, even some like OpenAI, like they had like their retention metrics don't look too good, or Cursor, these things that blow up. But no, going back to it. So I think starting it again, I think it depends on what you're selling. If it's I think if you're doing e-commerce these days, you probably don't want to take too much venture money. Maybe it's like bootstrap, you got some loans or some family or friends. And I think the first thing you're looking for, like as I mentioned, is you just really want to understand like. First, if it's a physical good, like the economics really matter. And that gets down to like crazy details. Like we would, you want to like, before you even build your product, you should actually like figure out like your shipping. Because if you're, if you're like 7.9 ounces, your shipping rate's going to be significantly less than if it's like 8.0 ounces, right? Or the shape of the box and all this stuff. Like you really want to, I think, if it's physical good, you really want to map out all the details of the economics. And I guess now these days, you think about tariffs and all of that. And really make sure that works. Like we had this brand where we were selling like paper flowers online. We found this woman in Michigan, and she was making these beautiful bouquets out of paper flowers. And like, these are stunning, but it would take her like, 12 hours to make a bouquet. And we're like, if we could like, do this at scale and productionize it, like we'll be able to like build something really beautiful. Because like flowers, obviously part of the problem is they go bad. So you can kind of sell it as, on the inventory side, it's hard, but if you could have inventory that doesn't go bad and it's flowers, you can sell a lot during Mother's Day and places times like this.
Flowers, they're like a, 3-figure, maybe, probably like 3-figure purchase. Like someone will drop like $100 on a bouquet.
Exactly. And so we did it, but we probably didn't spend enough time like thinking about like, the economics. So we spent like a year training up this factory in China, and they had all this expertise. It was actually like really hard to get that door. We got it to work, and just the economics just never penciled out. Like if I had been able to get my cost of goods down probably 30-40%, we probably could have built a business doing, I think, at least like 30 million a year in sales, because people really loved it. But we like had to charge like $300 for this thing, and it just like immediately, like, a lot of people are not going to pay $300. They're looking for like $100 or less gift for Mother's Day. And so I think really making sure before you go and do all your investment stuff, even if the product's good, like the economics ultimately have to pencil out.
I mean, it's probably the same thing on the B2B side too then, right? It's like you want to figure out your go-to-market, what a product's going to cost. And that, I feel like in software, a lot of that now is CAC. It's like, how much is it going to cost to sell this thing? Maybe in a lot of the AI tools, there's like a gross margin component of the cost of, building and serving the product and the models to people. You think that's fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think, talking a lot about growth, like ultimately, growth, like ironically, like I would say, like growth doesn't matter at all. Like if you don't have good retention, like I'd much rather have a business that has like, 95+% retention, or like, 100+% net dollar retention, that's growing like pretty slowly, than like the business growing super fast, but it's like people are churning really quickly, right? So again, you went back to this example, but like my evolution over time was I started a jewelry business. We sold tons of it. I had years, I made a ton of cash. And then by the end, got more competitive. We had all these people ripping us off in China, and ultimately, like the economics stopped penciling out. My ad cost got too high, and I sold the business for, a fraction of what I could have maybe at the peak.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, maybe it's something more retentive. We went and built like a vitamin gummy company, business called Fling Wellness, and we sell like vitamin supplements. And we're like, okay, why do we build that? Because vitamins, people take them every day. You can get them on a subscription plan, and like it should be much more durable. And on a relative basis, it was much more durable. But like, at the end of year one, still, I don't know, something like 80-90% of our customers are no longer buying on a monthly basis. And that's just like typical for most consumer businesses. And so I was like, all right, what's the one level up of like retention is something like where it's like, a B2B SaaS. And then within that, like we picked up a compliance product where, if you decided you don't want to use Numeral, we never do long-term contracts because, I think, well, A, we want to just like deliver our goods every day. If someone's not happy, I'm not going to make them stay. But B, you can't, if you decide to stop using Numeral, you can't just go and like stop doing sales tax. You have to just go and find an alternative provider. Otherwise, you're going to get a bunch of letters in the mail, and from angry letters with penalties from states, and a lien on your business.
Yeah.
And so I think I've like gone up and so I can grow this business much slower than maybe it took me a lot longer to hit like, it's the same revenue targets as my e-commerce businesses, but it's just so much more durable. I could turn off all my sales and marketing, and my business would still grow next year. Whereas I turned off all my Facebook ads for any of these e-commerce businesses, by this time next year, there's basically like $0, basically zero sales.
So then I think this like leads to the obvious next question here is just like, how did you kind of get started with Numeral? You kind of figured out this problem with sales tax, you just lived it. How did it all kind of come about?
Yeah, I mean, so, my first foray into sales tax was much simpler. So when I started, 2017, I had business based in California. I had to collect sales tax for my California customers who were buying from me, but I shipped to, Ann Arbor, Michigan. I don't have to think about I don't have to think about the taxes. I ship it tax free. It's pretty simple. So my local CPA, he takes care of my California taxes, sales tax for me. It's not something that's like really too much of a headache. And then what happened was at the end of 2018, there was this big Supreme Court ruling called Wayfair versus South Dakota, where South Dakota sued the furniture brand Wayfair and said, even though you don't have any employees in our state or any physical presence, because you're shipping so much inventory into our state and like using the roads and everything, you need to be collecting all the sales tax here. And so there was this like landmark 5-4 decision. And basically after that, there was a whole set of like, adjudications in different states. And ultimately businesses like mine had to go and register in all these different states. So each state has what's called thresholds. And so, if I sell $100,000 into Florida over the last 12 months, then I have to go register and start filing there. And so because our business was already at scale, we had to register in something like 40 different states. And then I started, dealing with it personally, where I'd get like physical mail from all these states, like letters from the Department of Revenue, Alabama, West Virginia. And like I had a case where there was some issue where, I think we had missed a couple filings and like West Virginia was trying to charge me all these penalties. So I'm like calling up, these folks in West Virginia and trying to beg them to waive a penalty for me and make some other changes. And, this is like a bootstrap business with like 2 full-time employees. And like, why am I as the founder dealing with this like weird esoteric compliance burden and
physical forms, calling people on the phone?
Exactly. Yeah. Why am I like, I literally just get like a stack of like mail every week from all these states. And every time you get it, it's like totally anxiety inducing because, half of it is like fine. Like, like California sent one to all of our customers last month. It was like, breast pumps are exempt for the next year and a half on sales tax. And it's like, we have no clients selling breast pumps. I don't know why you're getting that mail, but like, sometimes it's like, yeah, we're putting a lien on your business because you missed these filings. So you can't miss it. And so I'd always have like stacks of mail that I was like, just like putting off opening.
Yeah, because it's a bill. It's just like this thing. It's like a government envelope that shows up and you're like, what's inside? Like, how much am I going to owe somebody?
Yeah, it's just like every time you open the mailbox and it's a letter from like a government, like from a government tax authority, it's just an anxiety-inducing experience. And the incumbent software that we were using, this one called Avalar, I think, was really designed in the early 2000s before you had all this like cross-state kind of stuff that we're talking about. It was really it was designed for like bigger enterprises, like kind of it's like a piece of software like SAP or something. It wasn't, it's designed for tax professionals. So for, like if I'm as head of tax at this company or a controller, it's for someone like me that has no expertise. It was actually like really hard to use. The salespeople there were like, like used car salesmen trying to, like scare you into stuff and upsell you on things you don't need. And so I was like, this is crazy. And I think, again, I've been doing the e-commerce stuff. I did it, it was never some long-term vision. I'm going to be selling like, supplements online. It was sort of like something I could do to travel. I could do while I'm traveling. And then when COVID hit, I had to, come back from, at that point, I think I was in Italy, come back to the US and start working hard. And I'm like, well, I was like, a PM for many years. I miss building software. Yep. And so it seemed kind of like the confluence of like having this problem and missing building software. I like messaged my old boss at Airbnb, Gustav, who's like a partner at YC. And I'm like, this seems like a good idea, but like, doing a venture back thing is like, that's like, a life, it's like a big commitment for the next like 15 years, whatever. Yeah. It's like, no, like it makes a lot of sense. Like go do it. And so that was kind of the impetus to starting this was like, again, how do we take this thing where it's just like a lot of brain damage if you're a founder in particular to think about and try to make what, take these products that are like clunky old school and a very narrow, thin product experience and create a lot more, like make a much thicker product that really just owns this boring problem end to end. With our goal is that you never really have to actually like think about sales tax. Like all these, you see all these startups where, when I was first meeting with investors, they're like, what's your engagement metrics? How many times are they logging in? And I'm like, oh no, like tax. I'm like, this is like a negative correlation. Like I want like the more you log into our product, like that's like worrisome because ideally like we have customers who like will never log in for months. And like I met some woman at a conference and I'm like, and I was like all excited to meet her and shake hands. And she's like, "Do we work with you?" I'm like, "Yeah, like I was on the sales call. Like we signed you like months ago, and like you've paid us like, 5 figures in fees." And she's like, "Oh, okay." This one Rosa, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I think you do my sales tax, right?" And I'm like, oh. And then at first I was offended, and then after I was like, "Wait a minute, that's exactly what I want. Is like this just like bleeds into the background, and you never have to think about this like boring like compliance problem."
Yeah. That's fair. But I could see the framework, like if you read the blog posts about SaaS, it's like you want the specific like DAO or DAO wow metrics. Like, oh, they want to be logging in like at least 70% because it means they're logging in every day and then maybe on the weekend once, like so engaging. Yes. And I could see how that's the framework you might approach this with. And so when you started though, like you talked about like building your product, like it was just kind of like some spreadsheets. Like how did you get started, like actually putting this into motion?
Yeah. So, I mean, we started it before like our current co-founder, Matt, our CTO joined. And, we were just as a team, like going and doing things by hand, like, downloading data in weird, funky ways, like doing insane workbooks in Excel.
You kind of like built some spreadsheets that did the things.
We had some spreadsheets that had some formulas, but often just even normalizing the data, you were having to go and do it's just a lot of manual work. And then actually going to these state portals, the hardest part often is just the data entry. So like doing like a tax filing in Illinois just has this like user interface that's designed like probably like 20 years ago, and like every single local you can't just like go and put the tax rate for a local jurisdiction. You have to like go and like create like, it's like 5 or 6 clicks for each of the like, hundreds of tax jurisdictions. So it can take like well over an hour to go do a tax filing in a state like Illinois.
Wow,
and so
sucks. Like per file, like per customer.
Exactly. So my co-founder Kevin was like, he was just going and like working late and just, inputting things, cut and pasting. We had my virtual assistant, Michael, who I'd worked with for like over a decade. He started with with t-shirts for $3 an hour, designing t-shirts. We've upskilled him over the years. He's gotten good at Excel. And so a lot of it's just training folks like him to go and do a lot of this work. And, a lot of learning on the fly. And so we were able to actually get a first like set of customers without any engineering. And it was kind of funny going into YC, where I feel like most of the companies there were like, you had these like 22-year-olds from like MIT dropout, and they're just like, genius engineers, but like maybe didn't have a lot of like business or go-to-market intuition. And we were really indexed on the kind of opposite, where we were very like commercially minded, and we also knew exactly what we were building. There was no idea maze. And it was just trying to like brute force stuff for a long time. And then, fortunately now it's all like, all largely, mostly automated, and you don't have to think about this type of stuff. But
yeah,
I think at the start you can often, get off the ground without having to like necessarily do the big fixed cost thing of building it. It doesn't work for every product, but for some you can.
So you can automate that, the state of Illinois example of like 5 pages, clicking through, navigating. At that point, or this point, that's been automated?
So someone like Illinois, they have, you have an electronic filing system. So once we had enough clients, you go to them, you say, "Hey, I'm a firm. I have, 500 clients filing in your state. Like, can you let me get access to your
API?
I mean, these things are not like, they're like SOAP APIs designed from 30 years ago, like crazy XML files. But yeah, they'll have like some API. Some states don't have that. And so, a lot of it, we've had to also just invest in like browser automation. And, we're fortunate now that in 2025, browser automation is a lot more seamless powered by LLMs than maybe even a few years ago, where you're debugging these Selenium scripts every day. And it's
which one are you using right now? Are you allowed to say?
Browser based is some of like the infrastructure that we use, and then we would plug in a bunch of different models there as well.
Cool. Yeah, we had Paul at Browser Bases on the show a couple months ago.
Okay. Yeah.
He's like all about browser automation. He's like the browser automation expert.
Yeah, I think there's so many workflows out there that I think, it's kind of interesting. You can take these, you can almost like create an API out of like thin air in some ways, right? And so, we have things where, again, a lot of these states, they don't offer APIs. They don't have ways to access the data, but if you go log into a portal and the data is there, and it's scrapable, and so it kind of transforms a lot of the things we can do.
Yeah. So I guess I'm interested in learning how you went from scrappy operational, doing things that don't scale, the spreadsheets, to, it sounds like you brought on a CTO. A lot of things are automated. How did you go through that phase?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think one is, once you start having enough traction, again, this is the momentum thing, is like Matt was like, all right, you guys have built, you guys are building a real business here. Like, this is exciting. I should join. So we could get, Matt was like one of the first engineers at Stripe, one of the first 5 engineers at Notion. We could get some world-class engineering partner to work on it, versus I think it's sometimes harder to convince people before you have any traction to, quit their fancy jobs, right? This is, at that time we joined, he could have joined OpenAI and gotten paid, this heavy 7-figure salary. But I think that helped. And I think, we're also very mindful that you never wanted to do the manual thing for too long. There's been these lessons, like places like Zenefits, where I think they scaled really fast before they actually automated all their payroll compliance, and they started making tons of mistakes.
That's the thing they got in trouble for, right?
They got in trouble for, I think there's a couple, I think they got a lot of scrutiny for maybe going around some rules on the legal side. But largely what actually really killed them, from my understanding, was honestly they just didn't deliver a good product to folks, right? And so it all kind of compounded all the bad PR. But what was really happening is they were doing payroll for folks, and they were, and again, similar to sales tax, you have to go to the local governments and file payroll taxes on a regular basis. And because they hadn't actually automated these systems or built robust systems, they were doing things by hand, making tons of mistakes on people's payroll taxes. Customers were churning, and then their reputation got burned, and it went from this is a hot company, this is where you should default your payroll to actually don't trust them, go use Zen Payroll, which is now Gusto. Instead, they're gonna have a much more reliable thing they've actually built. It just works a lot better. And so I think that's always been something we thought about a lot, is your reputation just matters so much for something like this. And so when we make mistakes, we actually have a guarantee, and we'll cut folks checks. We wire people money, if we make them, if the mistakes on us, and we'll pay those penalties and interest if there's something went wrong. Just because A, it's the right thing to do, but B, it's also the right business decision.
Yeah, I feel like a compliance, security, taxes.
Yeah.
These are all things where it's you just want to trust that they're going to not mess it up. And it's probably something you don't want to over engineer it. As a customer, or you just solve it for me and just make sure it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's really binary in some sense. Just make the problem go away. And the things that we do, I think that it's differentiating or better is just try to make just reduce the amount of headache and brain damage, and just be as consultative as possible for folks, so they really understand what's going on without being pedantic and making it hard to understand.
And you've been very focused on just building the infrastructure globally just from the beginning. What was the importance of doing that, and how'd you do it?
Yeah, to be honest, it wasn't always from the beginning. I think we started off with the US, because the US sales tax is more complex by an order of magnitude than anywhere else, because in US there's 13,000 different tax jurisdictions, and like I said, one side of the block in Colorado is gonna have a different tax rate than the other side, whereas somewhere the complexity the complexity of the problem is a little bit different internationally. And so in UK, it's there's a flat 21% VAT or GST tax rate there. And so there's not this local problem where you need to understand all the nuanced tax rates. It's a lot simpler. But what makes it, I think, a lot harder on the international side is going and getting registered in all these different countries, hooking into all their different portals and places like that, dealing with different language issues, getting money movement, things like that. So the nature of the problem looks different. So when we first started with e-commerce, it was kind of okay to just be US focused, and we had a handful of customers in Canada, and we added that pretty quickly. But when we started selling to software businesses, very early on in your life cycle, you're selling globally. And so as soon as you do like a single sale in a country like Saudi Arabia or UAE, like you actually need to get registered right away, or else you're actually out of compliance and starting to build some like tax exposure, right? And the risk always with sales tax is, you know, you did a bunch of orders and you never collected the tax on that. And so when you finally, you know, when the authority finally comes to you, if you have to then go and pay those taxes out of pocket that you could have passed on to your customer.
So you want to just be collecting it right at the point of sale, right at time of delivery or
exactly.
time of invoice or whatever.
Exactly. And so that's always the risk here. Cause I think it's one of these things where it's like, a lot of the time it's like you can go do the order in Saudi Arabia and like it's not like the government's gonna come and find you tomorrow and regulate you, but like maybe you've been doing it for 2 years, you forgot about it, and you finally go to get buttoned up there, and now you have a few million dollars of historical exposure that you like waited to deal with, and that's where like the pain comes. And then on top of that, there's often be penalties and interest and audits and things like that. But it's really like that. There's all those tax dollars you could have been passing on to customers. Now that's your responsibility. And we've seen people, you know, tens of millions of dollars of exposure that like, you know, all they had to do was just go get it, you know, get started, you know, a few years earlier. And, you know, it's, you know, as a founder, you're busy, you have a million things to do. Like it's a really easy thing to just kind of keep punting on and not thinking about.
Yeah, because it's probably like you. So if you don't pay your sales tax, I'm assuming you don't go to jail. But like it's probably not that bad. But like, what happens if you just don't pay sales taxes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things, right? So the case where you could go to jail is I've seen folks where they've collected sales tax, but they didn't remit it. Like they turned on sales tax like in their Shopify, like, oh yeah, I'll do collection. And then they never thought to actually like remit it. And that's technically fraud.
Yeah, I was going to say that's like, yeah, literally fraud.
And so I don't know if like, I don't know if I've seen too many people go to prison, but like you can get you can get like felony charges for that. That's less common. Yeah. The bigger risk I've seen is like, you know, I saw a business that, you know, like someone like a marketplace is particularly affected by this, right? Because you have a lot of your revenues, you know, your revenue is really just your taxable revenue is really your GMV. And so if you're running lots of dollars through your marketplace and you're not collecting for a long time, you know, there was a business that had $25 million of tax exposure.
So what does that mean? It's like accrued taxes that they have not paid yet or remitted or collected?
Exactly. It's like if they had gone and like registered at the right time, like, you know, let's say they're selling across the country and that, you know, they should have registered in Michigan 2 years ago and they didn't. And so now in the last 2 years, they should have collected and remitted $1 million in sales tax and they didn't. Now, if Michigan goes and audits them, they'll have to go find $1 million and pay the state. And so, you know, I met these guys really early on, so I didn't have the expertise to really help them, but they had like $25 million of historical tax exposure. So if the states had all gone, you know, luckily like these states, it's decentralized. So
yeah, it's not coordinated. Like let's all go at once.
Yeah, like there are sometimes they'll do data sharing, like EU will do data sharing, and like there's things where I think like the Great Lakes region, like, you know, like Minnesota and Wisconsin will share data, but it, you know, so it can snowball to an extent. But if in theory, if all the states had gone to them, they would have had, you can get payment plans and things like this, but ultimately they would have owed $25 million and they had $1 million in the bank account. So it could like bankrupt your business if the liability is big enough.
And you can technically just like continue to not pay, but they'll add more fees, and then eventually will they like you can't operate in the state anymore or something if you don't pay?
I mean, so if the state reaches out to you, right, they can put a lien on your business.
So what would happen there? They just like when business that operates in the state, like they have the first right of refusal to like the cash that gets collected or something like that.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, I'm not totally certain. I've seen people's bank accounts get frozen in some cases.
Okay.
But if it's like a lien from a state that you're not operating out of, like, I'm not exactly sure the recourse, but I've definitely seen people's bank accounts get frozen before, or they'll send scary letters to like to Stripe or Shopify, and like certain things can actually like they might be forced to like freeze your accounts.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like one of those things where like you do need to handle this and you do need to take care of it because it will eventually stop you from being able to operate your business.
Yeah. And especially like, you know, if you're ever going to do any audit on your business, that's often where this comes up as well. So, you know, you go to like I had to call someone, they're doing an M&A transaction and like, you know, there was some historical exposure, and what happened was like, you know, they hadn't, this is someone, you know, they weren't a client, they were just trying to become a client of us like last minute, and like they hadn't been collecting in certain states. And so the auditors are saying, hey, it looks like you have, you know, liabilities of like $2 million to different states, you need to put $2 million, $2 million out of the sale price into this collateral account, and kind of like marking it off the deal price, because like that's a liability that I don't want to accrue as I'm buying your business. Now, in some cases, you're doing an asset sale. There's ways to kind of to smooth some of this over, but in this case, it was a stock sale, and so there was no way around it.
I was gonna say I've seen that before. I've had like portfolio companies that like at the end of the like they sign a term sheet, they go through like a 2-month diligence process, and then like the second to last day, they're like, by the way, we're knocking the price down by your accrued liability in this one place because we think there's like outstanding sales tax.
Exactly.
Exposure.
Any buyer business, like they have a checklist of things they can do to like knock your price down, and so sales tax is just one of those things on the checklist, and it's like it's a pretty easy one to just find something there. And so
because customers are usually just willing to pay, like it's just an extra like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%, just like at the time of sale that you just kind of bolt on, and they usually pay it.
I mean, they have to pay. I think, the nice thing is you only, in the US at least, you don't show it until you're at checkout. And so, it's hard to know, like you can't really run an A/B test around this, like to know how it affects your conversion rate. But like, I think, customers are used to paying sales tax. And so, you just have to do it. I mean, it's just, the thing is, it's like legally mandated, right?
Yeah. So one thing too, I think you guys have been like really focused on building out good infrastructure. And this is a podcast, it's a tech podcast. We have to talk about AI. I feel like we're contractually obligated at this point. How are you using AI at Numeral?
Yeah, we use it in a handful of ways. I think one is, again, a lot of these bigger companies, what you end up doing is you get to scale is you have these thin tools like, incumbent tools like Valara. And in order to manage them, you either, hire a bunch of staff, like someone's like a controller, head of tax, or you hire a consultancy, like a sales tax consultancy, to like manage that software, because it's just kind of, there's a lot of complexity. And so what we're trying to do is make it so that anybody in the company can manage sales tax without much expertise. And so all this kind of more service work kind of goes away. So to give an example of that, as I mentioned before, you get all this physical mail from the states. They'd love to send it to you every week. If you're registered in 40 states, you're going to get some mail. What we did early on was we said, let's scan all of that mail from our customers, and we'll read all those letters. And if some action needs to be taken, we'll just go and do it for them, so they don't have to think about it, right? So you might be filing. A really common thing that happens is, sales tax, you're typically filing on a quarterly or monthly basis. But what will happen is, even though maybe you're filing quarterly, at the end of the year, the state does an analysis. Hey, their sales have gone up. We actually want them to file monthly. We're just going to send them a piece of mail that says now file your Michigan's to say, hey, now you got to file monthly in our state.
And someone might miss that.
Exactly. And so Avalar is not going to update automatically. And so if you don't, usually you get the piece of mail, you have to go within a few days of opening that letter. And this is a really small thing, but this mistake happens constantly. You forget to do it. And all of a sudden, when you go file your taxes at the end of the quarter, you now have a bunch of delinquent filings you didn't have with penalties, and you have to go and there's just a bunch of work to get that fixed. And so what we did is we scan all that mail automatically. We started off by we had some contractors just reading thousands of pieces of mail like by hand and categorizing it. And it was a horrible job. They hated it. Yeah. They had this like beautiful spreadsheet, like Google Sheets, but it was like lowbrow. And like, honestly, it's nothing too fancy, but it was, handful of AI prompts and things. We're actually now able to automatically sort all of that mail into different buckets, and we actually automatically take action. So now, if Michigan tells you have to file monthly, there's no human intervention. Like we were able to read that mail, parse what it's saying, and update in our system that, okay, now, client Y has a monthly filing in Michigan. Or if something's escalated, we know to put it to an escalation team. So there's still maybe humans at different points, but like it's able to do all that reading on our behalf and take action.
So it's not like if I'm a user of the product, I'm getting this like generative AI LLM powered experience like in the interface, but it's like on the back end of just like, we no longer have this like contractor army of people who don't actually enjoy what they're doing, and just we've automated it all and it just shows up in the software.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the user experience that I always aim for is that you just barely ever log in. And so a lot of it is behind the scenes. The other thing that's pretty interesting as well is, I talk about all these different tax rates and all these different, all these different localities. And, the question is like, how do you actually get those updated rates? I'm making this example up, but like, how do I know that Juneau, Alaska is passing a 7 cents tax on soda cans or something like that? And it's not like there's like some centralized like ledger database that all the states are updating with the soda can tax laws. It's like, they'll put out city council notes, they'll post a law somewhere. And the way that incumbents have solved this is they'll have like huge research teams. Like Avalara has like over 50 folks who are just manually like going and reading laws. Each month they just like go back to the law and they just read through it, like hitting Control F, trying to see if anything changed there. And they make mistakes all the time. And so it's like an obvious place where, what are LLMs good at? They're great at reading data. They're great at reading written text and extrapolating what it means. And so, a combination, we're using a lot of these like RAG engineering techniques to go take all the laws, reference them, and then there's still, human evals going on our side, but able to like build this like, we call it like tax research that normally would cost tens of millions of dollars and require, like armies of like lawyers and researchers. And in doing it like at a fraction of the time, at a fraction of the cost, with higher accuracy. And so it's, kind of adjacent to maybe some of the techniques that a lot of these like legal AI startups are doing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like one of those things where like, you're removing the human work. Like someone could get really upset that you're like replacing the jobs or whatever, but like the people are Control F-ing a PDF and find like, come on, like no one enjoys that. Like we should be automating that job and move those like really talented people that understand tax law into like doing things that are maybe tax law, maybe, I don't know what doing things are better for the economy, but like, or better for the world, but like you're like upskill, you're able to like put these people into things that just are more enjoyable or like add more value.
Totally, right? So like, again, we have like our head of tax research, who's like a senior director at Avalara, and he was used to just doing like a bunch of Control F and like reading and like doing like really like, I mean, he had a team too doing this, but a lot of low level work. And they were like, and honestly, they were just moving those jobs to India anyway, because it was often like, lower value. But like, there are cases where we really need someone like him. He's a trained lawyer to go and look at this. And is this, is the edible underwear apparel or is it candy? And like someone who's a trained lawyer with years of experience, is probably going to have a more nuanced take on that. And so it's not that like, this job, like, the high skill, like human parts are eliminated, but like, there's a lot less rote, boring, like work, like mind numbing work going on. And the low level stuff has been automated.
So if I'm somebody I'm competing against like incumbents with, let's say like a less good product, I don't know if this is like a fair way to set this up, but what advice would you have to them of like, here's how I would approach selling the product and like kind of converting people over?
Yeah, I mean, so early on, like our product was like not good, right? I didn't have a dashboard for months. I remember so many emails like, hey, we're refactoring our dashboard. It'll be ready in like 2-3 weeks. And we were just like doing all of our compliance. It was basically a service. Again, not every business can do this, but for us, it was like a service business, right? I'm like sending, send me your data over like an email and I'll like send you back your tax filings over email. But the one thing we did do that the incumbents were doing was like just going above and beyond, right? Like, you could book a calendar, you could book a call with me anytime. I would respond to your emails right away. I was the one reading people's mail like at the get-go.
Did you sit in like the customer support email, just like constantly answering?
Yeah, I constantly answering. I mean, I was doing all the sales calls too, so everyone knew me, and like I still do this today. Every time I jump on a customer call, I give my personal phone number on every call, because I want to know if like something's not going wrong. We have an amazing customer experience team, and like it shouldn't get escalated, but like. Yep. If you have a lien on your business or something happen, I much rather someone complain to me and I know and I can solve the issue than just like someone's just frustrated and quietly quietly mad or gonna churn or something like that. So I think what you can do is it's like it's the boring refrain of like do things that don't scale. But I think the other thing too is I think in this age of AI, what you can offer, what we really figure out you can do is you can basically start by building a service business out of the get-go, and then what you do is you figure out how do I take these things that are like more service looking things, like reading people's mail, and actually turn that into like, how can I use AI to automate that? So another example would be like, you need to figure out what's the product category here. So again, I was saying like, you look at something like like an Olapop, like those like, healthier sodas.
Oh yeah.
And it's like the client might make a, the way the incumbent software is, they say, hey, go apply tax codes to your thing. So you're a customer of Olapop. I go to Avalara. I guess I'll put soda there, but actually, I'll put the soda tax code 257. And so now I know it'll be taxed as soda.
Yep.
But actually, what we do is to say, like, you shouldn't be, that onus should not be on you. Like, you're not the tax expert. You don't actually know what the taxability is. And so what we'll do is, by hand, again, we were doing this first. We'll make sure, okay, Olapop, no, it's actually, the tax category is sparkling juice with 0 to 25% juice is the taxability for that, okay. Right? Because again, based on different laws, like some states tax it differently.
Yep.
So first of all, we prevent that mistake from happening at the get-go. And we were doing that by hand. And like, we were just like, I was doing it, right? Because I didn't trust anyone on my team. We trained some folks that have sales tax expertise.
Yep.
And then now, we have multimodal LLMs. We actually will make sure, like, if there's nutrition facts or supplement facts, those get uploaded into the LLM. And it's not that it's 100% automated. There's hard cases where maybe someone has to come in and really dig into like, and do some maybe original tax research, but like a lot of the low level stuff can be automated. And so, but it wasn't at the start.
It reminds me of one of my portfolio companies. It's called Hanover Park. They do fund admin. I don't know if you've ever invested in a venture fund or like any of these like private asset classes.
Yeah, of course.
So it's a very there's some software for it, but it's still a very manual thing. Like if you use Carta, you get a sales call with Carta. There's like 5 salespeople on the call, and
God.
it's still pretty manual. And he's like doing a similar thing with like fund admin services of like trying to just automate some portfolio updates. Like your portfolio sends you an update and like it ingests it in and it's like in the software of like how the company's doing.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things where it's like a little bit scary when he told me that this is what he was doing. I was like, I don't know, fund admin, like, everyone hates their fund admin provider, but then it like reflects back and like, well, maybe there's an opportunity to use LLMs to automate some of this like manual low level work that has historically given a bad product experience.
Yes.
But you can actually flip it. And by automating some of the service aspect, it's still always there. Customer service is a big component. Like for him, when somebody's, for a customer, he guarantees like the implementation, he goes and he'll sleep in your office until it's live. So it's like, it's like they're automating the manual stuff, but he's still hardcore, just like whatever you need me to do, I will do for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think, there was a wave a few years ago, I don't know if you remember, where there was like tech-enabled services. You had like Pilot, and then Justin Kahn had like his like AI law, or no, he had his like
Atrium.
He had like the law firm that blew up.
Yep.
And I would say maybe it was like the idea wasn't wrong, but maybe the timing was wrong, right? Yeah. And I think there's probably still cases where like it doesn't work, I'm sure. Again, our business, one of the things that's nice is sales tax is typically most of the decisions are deterministic. There's not a lot of interpretation. And so the stuff can be mostly automated, but I'm sure there's a bunch of other services business where maybe you just start off by building it like, the VC, a lot of VCs are going to hate this, but you build it like a normal service business, and then you just go workflow through workflow and find ways to automate it. And so my guess is there's a whole host of, unicorns like sitting like ideas that are there that waiting for that. The way ideally, you build the automation from day one, but like, you can always do things that don't scale from at the start.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking about VCs, like, I think it's good to get their feedback on things, and like they may have opinions on it. Like they've seen just tons of companies, and it's like sometimes you can like fast track and, avoid certain dead ends, but also like they're not the all-knowing experts. Like they're wrong all the time too. Yeah. So, but on that note, so I know that you've raised a couple rounds for Numeral. How did you think about like raising money? Because you mentioned before, like bootstrapped, you like owning the business, and like not like you're working remote, nomadic, like you like not having the stress. How did you think about, okay, I'm moving back to San Francisco.
Yeah.
I'm going to raise money for this thing.
Yeah. Good question. I mean, definitely some of it was just like being like ignorant or something, like, so or like lying to myself a bit. Like I would say, I had, so again, I was at my company Teespring, and like my that company was valued at, whatever, $500 million. My 2 of the founders are close friends. One of them was like in my wedding, and we were like in our early 20s. They're worth 9 figures on paper. I'm like, holy crap. And then it just like went through some traumatic stuff where everyone got wiped in the end. And so I definitely have some scar tissue from doing like these venture businesses and seeing like the toll it can take on just like your mental health as a founder. And so I think I'd always kind of like, I knew I wanted to do it eventually, but kind of kept kicking the can. And so we started looking at this business Numeral, and we're like, we could probably get it off the ground bootstrapped, but ultimately I think for some business models like SaaS, like the venture model works really well for a reason. You have all these big upfront fixed costs, like the engineering and on the sales side, but because it's a highly retentive business, that it pencils. So we're like, if we just do this like the bootstrapped way, like we're just going to go way slower. Our product's not going to be as good because we won't be able to invest in R&D and engineering as much. And like, if it works, then someone smart's going to just go raise a bunch of money and outcompete us there. And so they're like, what, we're kind of somewhat forcing that decision. And I think we also have always tried to take money incrementally. So only, don't take much more than you need. And you can always, go back if you really need more money, you can always go back out and get more. And so that's my approach. I think, I'd always want to do YC. And so it was kind of an easy way to just like, you start the heroin drip of VC funding there, and it feels all safe and cushy because YC is a community. And then before you know it, you're just on that treadmill. But again, I think if you're going to build a serious SaaS business, like I think it's really hard to do it. So obviously there's cases people have done it without, but founders, it's just, I think startups are getting more and more competitive. And like, there's more and more venture money out there, and so someone sees that you're doing a good job. We've had people come and copy our business model, and so like, you just have to be like, capital is a way to be just more competitive.
Yeah, and I know you work with Susan at Uncork. How did that come about? Meeting her?
Yeah, after YC, if the demo day, you have or even before demo day, you have all these investors come through, and she had a thesis around the space already. And so, we meet a lot of investors, but I think she had just like high conviction, had done way more research on the space, had talked to the founders of some of our space like Tax, and just, really understood our vision well. And so resonated. And then I think also we decided at that time too, it was our seed round. We thought it'd be better to have a seed specialist versus someone like a multi-stage firm, which can like, create some risk if they don't want to invest in you at the A, and you maybe have less optionalities at the A with having a multi-stage firm do your seed. And so we thought like at the margin, like I think I liked her on a personal level and seemed like she would hustle for us. And so that's why I decided to work with her, and she's been great.
Can you explain that a little bit more? Like, what's the risk of a Series A firm or a multi-stage firm doing a seed, not doing Series A? Like, how does that play out? Or like, if I've never heard that before, why is that important?
Yeah, so I think it's effectively what happens is, these multi-stage funds, they're doing seed checks. There's basically putting an option on your business, right? It's like the option to do the A later on. And first of all, like when you have a huge fund, hundreds of millions of dollars, giving someone a $2 million check, like they don't really care about
it's like
you.
0.1% of the portfolio. Like they need to do 1,000 of those to deploy the capital.
Exactly. So they'll just give you a check. They don't they'll come like, they don't really care about you.
Yeah.
And then second of all, when you go to Series A, there's kind of an expectation that they'll either lead the round or at minimum participate. And so if they don't want, if for whatever reason they don't like your business or there's some disagreement there and they don't want to lead or do your A, then it can make it very difficult to go and do your A because it's a huge negative signal for the business.
Yeah.
And also you might be more constrained in terms of valuations and things like that because they have sort of this like unfair leverage on you.
And so the reason you do somebody who specializes at seed is because it's like from someone like Susan and Uncork, it was like a meaningful check for them. It moves, like if you do well, it moves the needle for them. And she'd be more willing to like jump on a call, do something to help you out.
Yeah, she's a vested interest. And then I think even at the like A, she's probably a more unbiased person in terms of making introductions and things like that. Because she's not gonna like, maybe they'll do the pro rata, but they're not gonna like put in a sizable check, and so they might be a little more objective in terms of who you get at the A.
Yeah, makes sense. I think when you raised your Series A, I think you said you did it in like a week or something. Like, what's the story with the Series A? How did you like get ready for it, and then how did it all come about?
It was funny. So yeah, there was a little bit of preparation. You want to get your financials right, and I actually I'd gotten married like right when we started the business. And so I couldn't take a honeymoon because we were like seed stage. And so a year later I had a deferred honeymoon. I was like in Japan, but we hadn't really, we didn't have a, in-house on finance team, and our financials were in messy states. So I was like waking up every morning, like stressing about like making sure our ARR was clean and getting the financials in a good place.
On your honeymoon?
Yeah. We're like waking, it's like the nicest hotel of my life in like Hokkaido. It's like thousands of dollars a night. And like, I'm like still like dreaming about like my ARR and like, how do you think about like committed ARR versus like pending ARR, all these like, it's like people, ARR is like, it's not a GAAP compliant metric. So you can think about different ways.
Yeah.
And just like stressing me out, trying to take calls from there. And so I kind of came in like pretty a little bit, business was doing quite well, but there was just some stress around like, how buttoned up are we? And
because you don't want to lie about that stuff. Like you just want to make sure that you're clear about what all these things are. By the way, this is like my wife's nightmare of like us on a vacation and me just like thinking about work.
Yeah. We had like, we literally had like we had like 3 baths in our hotel room. Like, it's like a super premium, like the nice thing ever. And I'm like in the bath, like my wife's like getting mad because you can tell my brain's like thinking about, I'm like in my laptop. That's founder life, I guess. But we came back, we got into a good enough place to go out, and I went on a Tuesday, and I met Chethan from Benchmark, and within like, I think like 10 minutes of talking to him, like he understood everything instantly. And, he had seen the space before. He's been, VC for almost 20 years and had looked at Avalara early in his career before it went public. This is probably in like 2008 or 2009 or something like that. And like always thought the space was like underserved, and understood like kind of the AI angle and all of that. And so like 15 minutes in, I got a real lesson in terms of selling from him. He's like, wait, pause. And I mean, again, he's from Benchmark, he can do this. He went and he's like, open your calendar. I'm like, okay. He's like, let's get dinner tomorrow night. It's like, okay. It's like, and then like block off this time on Friday. Like I'm going to like, we should do a partner meeting on Friday. I'm like, okay. And then he's like, okay. And then also, what's your phone number? I'm going to send you like 6 reference checks on me like right away. Like went full, like full court press. And I never, it was just like really aggressive selling. And again, being someone from like a highly reputed firm, things like that, you can maybe be a little more aggressive, but it was like definitely a learning lesson for me now when I even go and try to close like, really candidates that I'm really excited about. I've had to learn to just, I fly out and like get drinks with someone and like, and really just like do this, the whole, like give reference checks on myself, like do like this kind of full court press. And yeah, I think, again, there was kind of alignment from day one in terms of like what we were trying to build, and we were fortunate to have like good team, good metrics, all that. And so, yeah, we basically did our Series A in 4 days and ended up having to go.
And you met Chethan on the first day?
I met him on the first day. I actually got an intro. I forgot to get an intro to him. And then Susan, who's on another board with him, introed me that morning. So I got introed to him that morning, took a call in the evening, and then
dinner the next day.
And then on Friday, I was staying at my because I was living in LA at the time, and my parents live in the East Bay. I was staying at my parents. They saw me. I've been working till 1 a.m. every night. They saw me exhausted, like, oh, aren't you excited to have the weekend here? It's like Friday night, like you better relax. And then I'm like, actually, like I was texting with Chethan. I'm like, I'm actually going back to the Benchmark office at 9:30 tonight on Friday night, because like we're gonna go just negotiate this thing out right now.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was like by the time we just sat in a room and like worked through the numbers. I think like 11 o'clock, we're like, all right, good enough. Like we agreed on terms. And yeah, but it was nice because I really wanted to get back to work too. And like I think, I could have gone longer. We had a lot of interest. You can go and you could go try to maximize your price and drag these things out. But I think, as an entrepreneur, like you just have to be you have to just be decisive and like move fast and not. I see a lot of folks that just like, if you're highly neurotic, you're not going to be a good founder because you just need to just like commit to decisions. And so for me, I think there's mutual respect there that we were both like, he as well. Like I had some VCs that were going to my data room, which again was like, or I wouldn't call it a data room, just like going to my spreadsheets, which were like, like the data was fine, but it wasn't like as like, this is not like public company numbers. And they were obsessing over like random like details. And I love that like Chethan, like he asked me some questions, but like, he wasn't focused on like, are we going to go from, like a series,
are you going to be at 7 million or 8 million ARR by the end of the year?
Exactly. Are you going to double? Like just some folks are like really obsessed, like how are you going to go from now you are to like 3x the size? He was just much more concerned, like, can you actually build like a $10 billion business doing this? And like, do we have alignment on like, you know, how we're going to approach that? And so it's like really seeing the forest from the trees, I think is important. Whereas all these other firms, they'll bring in some associate who's like fresh out of banking and like all day, you know, they're like breaking down your P&L details. And I think maybe for like a later stage investment, that makes sense. But for a Series A, you know, that's not, that's not how I would approach it, at least.
Yeah. It's interesting, like sales lessons to your point. Like when I'm on a call with the founder and like, I know like, oh, this is pretty interesting. Like, oh, I'm going to be in New York next week. Like, let's get coffee when I'm in New York, or like whatever the extent of like when the next touch point in the sales process has to be.
Yeah.
Definitely something I've learned over the past, like my side fundraising with LPs, but also with founders too. I was just like, okay, like I know this is interesting to me. Like, let's just move forward and like show that there's intention there instead of just, you know, kicking the can down the road and doing stupid shit that like doesn't really matter at the end of the day, of like that, oh, like nitpicking about like certain data room points or whatever. Like, I think there's like this quote of like every deal dies in the data room or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, there's like fraud out there. And so you want to make sure, obviously you're catching that, you're not investing in those things. But I think, like just, you have to be decisive. Otherwise, because like at the end of the day, everything's about speed, right? And so this is why I like the big companies lose, you know, like someone like Google is like somehow behind OpenAI, despite probably having a lot of real like structural advantages, is because you have a team of 8 people being neurotic about like covering their ass and like, and all this other stuff. Whereas like Sam can just come in the meeting and be like, we're doing this. Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, let's just go. Like, well, there's some risk, but I don't care. Yeah. You just move way faster. So I think it's everything through just making decisions. If you don't have that level of confidence, to just, you know, and like willingness to like, also sometimes like you're going to make mistakes sometimes and you're being just quick and decisive, but like, you know, you have to just go quickly.
Yeah. This is actually a question from Nate on your team. So, I mean, it seems like Numeral's firing on all cylinders, working really well. If you had to look forward 5 years and you guys fail, like doesn't work out. Yeah. What do you think the reason would be?
Good question. I think a couple things. I think, you know, one is like broadly the way I see it today, at least, is that like everything's really an execution question for us. You know, the market I think is there for us. There's there's been multiple public companies worth, you know, roughly $10 billion here. This is not like this is not some novel space we're trying to create. I mean,
like every company that generates revenue has sales tax, pretty much.
It's legally required. And then like the bigger vision again is like nobody's built a global version of this, right? So, you know, we look at deal all the time, despite maybe what's going on in the news. What they did figure out was like, you know, when you had payroll before deal, maybe you use Gusto or Rippling or whoever for US, and then you're stuck using a bunch of different random global vendors. I need my, you know, local accounting firm in Japan to handle my Japanese contractors. I need this nasty bundle of vendors, and they're just like, F it, we're just gonna go to these countries, like do the hard work of like creating like a more vertically integrated business and getting lawyers on the ground. And that's actually what we're building as well, is actually going. And so it's kind of a one-stop shop to get your global compliance. And so I think this is a really hard thing to do, though. Like actually like going and figuring out how to deal with the Korean tax authorities is not simple. In Mexico, you actually have to go often in like to file things. You have to send someone to this building in Mexico City. They wait in line for an hour. You need a wet signature. And like, there's a lot of like, just like nasty operational stuff. And I think that's, you know, so I think just like failing to like execute is always like the thing that at least scares me the most. It's nothing like structural. It's like I think it's when things are like outside your control, it's like less scary because you're like, you can be like a little bit more stoic about it. Like, hey, I can only control what I can control, and everything else, like you have to just be a little zen. But when you know it's in your control, then that's like what keeps you up at night because yeah. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that would probably be the reason we fail.
So like, how big do you think Numeral could become?
Our mission's to be, you know, like a decacorn at some point, you know, a public company. Again, I think, you know, you look at these businesses like Avalara, they're purchased by private equity, but they got taken private at $8.5 billion, and they're 90% of the revenues for U.S. tax. and they'll put out things. The TAM is 30 billion of this market. So I think certainly become like worth at least $10 billion. And that's maybe a reductive way to put it. I think, ultimately, again, we just want to build like the first piece of software where you have one place that handles your taxes everywhere, and just kind of makes this whole thing of like sales tax, or the broader term is indirect tax, kind of melt away.
Yeah.
I have like a bigger galaxy brain vision for it, but I don't know if that's
what's the galaxy brain vision?
So my galaxy brain vision of it is, you talk to a lot of economists, and what they'll tell you is actually income taxes are pretty bad, because income tax, what it does is it disincentivizes savings, disincentivizes investment. When I say income tax, I'm talking about capital gains tax, corporate income tax, personal income tax. So you're really taxing people for like, for income, for capital gains, you're taxing people like investing. And really, in some ways, what you actually rather be taxing is consumption, because that could be that money that you're using to consume could have actually been used as an investment.
And there's a lot of countries that mostly have consumption taxes, right?
Yeah.
Instead of income taxes.
Like Singapore, et cetera, right? The challenge with like higher consumption tax, and again, consumption taxes like sales tax, things like that, is that it tends to be regressive, right? Meaning like, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and myself are all going to pay this same amount of tax on our coffee from Equator right now, right?
Yep.
And so, it ends up probably undertaxing. If you want a tax system that's more progressive and taxing wealthy people, it's going to undertax them. And there's been a bunch of papers over the years in terms of how you could design a more progressive consumption tax. The challenge is it's a pain in the butt to implement, right? So how do I have a special tax rate so that when Bezos goes and buys his $2 billion yacht with his wife on it, like, how do we know that? How do we tax that at like 70%, not like, the same 6.5% that like your soda can is taxed at? And it makes the tax code so complex by being able to tax certain goods differently. And we have some of that, but it's not, it's tractable to an extent. And so my hope is, you having software like us empowered by AI makes the cost of compliance go down so much, and allows us to actually add a lot more complexity to the tax code, which most people don't want to hear, that you're adding complexity. But like, I think the hope with AI is you can actually complexity doesn't become as much of a cost anymore. And so then now you can actually design these consumption taxes to be much more progressive. And then over the long term, the real goal is not to raise taxes. It's just to get rid of income taxes, and so it actually allowed the economy to grow much faster. And you kind of have the system that has much better incentives in there.
That's definitely the galaxy brain vision.
Yeah. I'm not putting it in, in my, if I pitch an investor, and I think I don't want to bring that in and go on some 10-hour like libertarian like rant or things, but like it's, I think about it, when I'm in the shower late at night, it's something I do think about.
I mean, what I was thinking about a little bit was like, if I were to say like, how does this get like a much bigger TAM? Like the thing I think a lot about is like, how could this TAM actually be way bigger than what people think? So like, there's the Salesforce example of like, I had Vili Ilchev, who was like the head of corp dev at Salesforce for a while. And he's like, when he first joined, the market size of like CRM software was like 8 billion or something. And now Salesforce does like 30 billion in revenue or 40 billion. They have like 10% market share. It's like the TAM was way bigger. So I guess for something like sales tax, you could think like, okay, maybe like e-commerce is like only X%, like that they're using that to value the sales tax.
Sure.
And then on the software side, like, with AI, like does more labor shift to software? So like the sales tax actually get way bigger. Yeah.
So I mean, I think there, right? Like, you look at the economy, services is usually like the biggest chunk of the economy.
Yep.
More and more that's probably I would imagine it moves over to software, AI. Yep. And by the way, software is only like software is tax exempt in California. It's only taxable. It used to be taxed in like 2 or 3 states now, or started at 0, obviously when software didn't exist. Now it's taxable in roughly 30 states. And like you imagine over time, as software becomes a bigger percentage of the economy, it's just going to be taxed everywhere. And so, and the other thing is, businesses are going, despite maybe some of these short-term macro trends, businesses are going global like right away, right? So if you're an early stage AI startup company, all these companies are claiming these crazy ARR growth. That's like they're selling in Azerbaijan and Albania and all sorts of weird places. And when we talk to them, they're like, like I actually have all these liabilities in all these long tail esoteric countries, and I don't want to think about that. And so as businesses are selling globally right away, AI driven software is like become, hopefully like, eats into services economy and just grows the pie, then obviously, we'll grow linearly with that, or like, it'll correlate with that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about. So it's like, as it all gets more complicated, you want to make it simpler for people at the end of the day.
Exactly. I think like, again, the promise is like, we do a lot of nasty stuff underneath the hood, and the nice clean stuff maybe AI automates. The gnarly stuff is you send someone in Mexico to wait in line to do this thing.
You're still doing that?
Yeah. We have. You can't AI away like government law. I mean, maybe advocate in Mexico one day to get rid of wet signatures, but like, there's a whole host of stuff we do underneath the hood, and I think, but like the goal is you never have to think about this stuff. It's all obfuscated away. Yeah, and we're doing global money movements as well, and so I think all these things as well, like at least from my selfish business perspective, you find ways to charge for all that as well.
Yeah. So then a little bit of a more calm, simple, like easy question to end it on. You've lived nomadically for so long. Now you're in San Francisco. What do you think of San Francisco?
Ooh, good question. I mean, I grew up here, so I have like, I have some weird takes. I would say, let's see, I think like, San Francisco was like, when I first moved back after college, it was like, 2011, 2012, SF had this amazing energy. You had like the Mission was full of like service workers and artists and like, people, you go out on like a Tuesday night and there's all sorts of bars are busy. And, now it's much, I would say, that's a lot that's left. It's a lot sleepier. I think people complain about the dirtiness, the homelessness. Like for me, that doesn't actually, I mean, I want people to be taken care of and stuff, but like, that's not what actually bothers me. What bothers me more is that it's like just the boring. It's gotten like much more boring and like lack of like cultural things going on. SF's like a good town for business and I think like, again, we were talking earlier, like the Tenderloin, like the places like that, like it's actually like cleaned up and stuff or what. But I actually don't know if that actually solve, like it doesn't solve the problem that I remember in like 2011, 2012, like people moving from New York to San Francisco because it was actually like on the same footing culturally in some ways, and all these hot restaurants were opening and there'd be like good shows, and like just because the city gets cleaner, it's still just going to be a bunch of techies like me who are like drinking non-alcoholic beers on a Tuesday and going to bed like on time, and so I don't know how it gets that like I would hope there's ways to get cheaper housing and things like this to fix it, and like I think you have, folks doing the YIMBY stuff, which maybe helps at the margin, but it's just really hard for me to see how you can like bring housing prices down enough to like get back like, people who are really contributing more culturally to the city. Otherwise you end up somewhere it's like more like a Singapore or something where it just feels like these like kind of transient business cities.
Yeah, like it doesn't have a soul almost. Like you want to bring the soul back to San Francisco.
SF, its whole thing was it had a deep soul, right? Like in the 60s you had all these like, it was this kind of like, it was this blue collar city in the, then in like, the 60s you had all these like hippies move here and like, they made it like a weird city. They made it okay to be gay, but like, and that's really like I think what brought a lot of the specialness to here was this very like open-minded place and like and very accepting, and that maybe brings some things that are less pleasant, like maybe more openness, and empathy to homeless, where so things get dirtier, things like that. But like I think it's kind of weird going from the place that had like the very distinct culture to feeling more like I could be anywhere in the world right now, and it's the same generic shops. And so I don't know how you fix that, but
because I feel like that energy, the willingness to try new things, openness to new ideas is really what it takes for a successful startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
So you could maybe I'm being critical here, but like if you click and drag out, like you lose the soul, you lose some of that like creativity that and that like the bold like willingness to try new things that like makes San Francisco what it is for like tech.
Yeah, like I spent my like before I started this business I was full in LA. I still kept my place there. I split time, and like what I love about LA is like ugly, the air quality sucks, the nature's much worse, at least where I live on Silver Lake on the east side. But what I love is like there's always way more going on, you know, like this weird, I went shopping the other day, it's like this weird pop-up, it's like East Side LA tennis club, and like there's no business model here. They're just saying like weird like tennis club stuff that's like people that don't actually play tennis. And I'm like, this pop-up like could not survive. The rent would be too high in San Francisco. People would be weirded out by this weird clothing, but I love it was like so funky. Or like, you know, my wife and I, we love going to like Koreatown and eating hole-in-the-wall restaurants. And like, I don't think you have like, you still have immigrants coming from Korea, immigrants coming from South America, Central America, and opening restaurants and adding to the, you know, Armenia, adding to the culture. In San Francisco, the only immigrants coming are like, you know, engineer tech workers who, again, it's great they can spend money in the city and contribute stuff, but they're not I would say we don't, you know, someone like me, I don't add culturally to the city too much. And so I feel like, I'm part of the problem for sure.
Yeah. You think of like when someone moves to San Francisco, where do they move? They move to like Hayes Valley, like the center of like all the AI stuff. Or like I guess the mission now, right? It's like move next to the OpenAI office.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I'm hopeful for like, I think Lurie's doing some good, you know, he's doing some good stuff. Like public safety matters, but like, again, for me, what matters is like, is it interesting? Is it fun? Is there like some cool new like cultural thing I can check out? And I think the cultural piece, you know, there's the money to solve it, but like most tech people like, you know, if you get money in like finance in New York, you might be going to spend a bunch of money on art and you're trying to buy cultural capital. The way to get culture, you know, in LA, same thing. The way to buy cultural capital in San Francisco is to do a bunch of angel investments. So maybe it's good for like the GDP of the Bay Area, but like it makes it a little less interesting.
Yeah, we need to make it cool to invest in culture in SF.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, burners are great, but like not enough money going into arts. Like we do art, you know, my brother-in-law is like a successful ceramicist in LA, and like we go into art openings all the time, and that stuff's super. It's for me, I love going to environments where I'm the only techie there. Yeah. And in SF, I go out in the night and everyone's, you know, talking about whatever
the new model from
Cursor's latest round, and how did they do that? You know, how are the economics of that? And you know, that's fun to an extent, but I think it just becomes like a little monotonous, and maybe I'm just self-conscious that I look and feel like everyone else here.
I think this is a good way to end it. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome. It was so fun to catch up, and thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening. If you missed it, make sure to check out last week's episode with Spencer Skates on growing Amplitude to over 300 million ARR and how he's thinking about AI today. If you want to miss a future episode, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, in the show notes to get each episode plus a transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.